I won't pry. It's none of my business. It's all that fly fishing, maybe. So, all right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Spooktacular Live. My name is Paul, and I am so very happy to, and a little scared, to be joined by the incredible great grand nephew of Bram Stoker, Mr. Dacre Stoker. How you doing, sir?
Hey, Paul, thanks for having me. Great time of the year, isn't it? This is the Halloween season, baby. This is it.
Spooky season. Is this when you sort of come out from your coffin and everyone gets to behold your greatness?
Yeah, the lights go down, the coffin's open, the soil is everywhere, and I feel very comfortable this time of year. All my brethren are out. This is where the veil is lifted, as they say in Ireland, the veil between the physical and the supernatural. So I'm very comfortable.
Well, that's got to be fun. More friends, the merrier, I always say. So, and again, writer, author, now newly dubbed Count. You guys can go to DacreStoker.com and you can see all of the incredible works that Dacre has written, co-written, worked on. Of course, we've got quite a few. Let's bring up some of the books, and maybe we'll go through these a little bit more. Let's bring up first. I think the very first work that you had. This is the official sequel to Dracula. Oh, next one. There we go.
There we
This is
go. Yeah.
Dracula the Undead, the sequel to the original classic, of course, by Dacre Stoker, and worked on with Ian Holt, I believe.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, Ian had a cool idea, and that was, that there's no proof that Dracula actually died in the end of Bram Stoker's Dracula. That's actually it's very, up for grabs is because there was no stake involved in the final battle. So Ian came to me and said, I need your help. Come on, I got this idea of a screenplay, but I think it'd be better in a book. Would you help me write a book? Let's continue the story. So we continue the story 25 years after Bram's story
Oh,
ends. What it ended with was the birth of a child. Mina and Jonathan had a child. They went back to Transylvania to pay homage to Quincy. And this child then grows up. And in our story, he's 25 years old and he's
okay.
beginning to ask questions. And of course, that
Oh,
opens up Pandora's box and all hell breaks loose.
it sure does, and isn't it? And this is the perfect time for all hell to break loose. The whole month of October, I feel. And of course, so Dracula the Undead, the official sequel, but you also wrote the prequel to the original as well. Let's bring that one up there. And this is just Dracul. So I'm
Yeah.
curious as to how do you approach the sequel versus the prequel? Like, does your mind shift a little bit there?
Well, I kind of took a page out of Star Wars books, did things backwards. The
There you go.
sequel to me was the first thing that came to mind is this story didn't end. Let's continue it. But then I did another 10 years of research and I found this good friend of mine, JD Barker, who's a superb writer. And we decided to turn it into epistolary style. But I wanted people to know how Bram Stoker's life intersected with him writing the story Dracula with a major caveat, as if the story was real. And many people believe, based on papers we have found, that the story was real. So in
Yep.
fact, Daker and JD came up with a very compelling story, and it's sold great, and it's got a lot of people on the edge of their seat.
Oh, I mean, it seems incredible, and I do love that caveat that it was real and it's all happening, in real life around him, and putting, your great grand uncle in the book. Have you ever wanted to put yourself in your books?
There's time for that, but Bram was really such an interesting guy. He had this mysterious illness, and my background, having been a coach all the way up to the Olympic level, I saw people, make incredible recoveries. But Bram Stoker
Mm,
at the age of 7 was an invalid, and he became a champion athlete at the age of 17. How did he do that without a little supernatural help? And if he
just
did,
saying,
then
without some
that's the
help.
basis for the story. Exactly.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, and again, guys, all of these are available, I believe, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I think is it billions, millions of books or billions of books.
Yeah,
Um,
books a million,
or
and anywhere books are
books a
sold, you
million.
can get these. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, anywhere books are sold. We have a couple people here who have read the audiobook and they love that as well. So go out and get those. And then, of course, which we don't have the asset for because I wanted to focus on the two core books there, but you also have The Lost Journal of Bram Stoker, The Dublin Years, which, again, was very pivotal because you sort of took us a quick sidestep out of the Dracula universe, but it's still very much encompassing or sort of shrouding it, would you say?
Paul, you're right. That was actually I found that during my research for Drac the Undead. It was a journal in Bram Stoker's great grandson's attic, if you can believe it. They couldn't
Oh,
read it because the handwriting was so bad. But what it does basically is a book that Bram kept as a college student. for about 11 years when he went on to work for Henry Irving. So it spanned an important part of his life. And it helped me figure out how the man was wired so I could use all that information writing Dracula with J.D. Barker.
Wow. I mean, it's wonderful, and I love just like if you really want to get lost in Dracula and Bram Stoker. I mean, who where does the character start and the writer end, sort of? I love that you approach that and you brought that to these books, and you get a real good book end. Now, do you have a particular reading order that you would recommend for people, like, and including the original novel as well?
Yeah, if people really want to go, the full, 9 yards, you read Dracul that JD and I wrote. Then you
Okay.
read a short story called Dracula's Guest. Now we haven't published it; it's in public domain, but it was part of the typescript. So Dracula's
Okay.
Guest. Then read the original Dracula, and then go pick up Dracula the Undead, the continuation. That's
Right.
the collection, and yeah, it's a pretty good read if you do the whole thing. Probably in over a period of weeks because it's a slow burn.
Oh, okay. And in between thoughts and ideas and maybe book breaks, check out the Lost Journal of Bram Stoker to sort of stay in the mind there of the man. So I mean, so you give tons and tons and tons of lectures on not only Bram but on Dracula. So I mean, we can call you a Dracula expert. I'll call you a Dracula expert. It's fine, and also a Bram Stoker expert as well. Would you have any insight, again, not to get too much into it, because I'm sure you do have tons of works that people can read in depth, but where did Bram Stoker get the idea for Dracula?
Well, that's a great question. It's what I usually get asked, and the first thing is I call it Bram's perfect storm. It's his childhood in Ireland. Who actually have incredible history of mythology, folklore, of their own versions of vampires. They're just not called vampires. They're called changelings, pukas, banshees, dead all that stuff Bram was exposed to as a young man. But he also had some very weird real life experiences, like being sickly himself, and I believe he was bloodlet. And being bloodlet was
Mm,
pretty horrific.
yeah.
Also, his mother told him a story of her growing up in Sligo during the cholera epidemic, 1832, where she witnessed misdiagnosed premature burial and people crawling out of the grave. So I think that creates sort of a traumatic sort of childhood for Bram.
I'd say. Yeah.
Wouldn't you think that Freud would have a real field day if they got into his brain?
Yeah, he's like, cancel all my appointments this week. I'm going to be busy.
I got to look into Bram Stoker's brain. And then we fast forward to Henry Irving, his boss, for 27 years, playing the role of this devil creature, Mephistopheles, in the play Faust, which just hammered at Bram, the devil, coupled with the fact that Bram was working in London during the time of this sort of revitalization of spiritualism, the supernatural. And he started researching in the London Library, and we found all of the books that he used for his research, which was talking about vampires and trance, supernatural. It was something that people were really interested in. Arthur Conan Doyle was a good friend of his, the great
Oh,
spiritualist, as well as writer of Sherlock Holmes.
right.
Mark Twain was a neighbor of Bram's and a spiritualist. So there was this fascination with the other world, supernatural. And Bram just took it and molded it to something that people believed was real, all these vampire scares going on. And we had one in America too.
Yeah. And so with that, sort of playing into the culture and playing a little bit with the culture, I mean, you can speak as definitively as you'd like, but do you think Bram believed 100% without doubt in the existence of vampires?
Well, I'll tell you what I know he believed in. He believed that there was thousands of people around the world. His research, the one interview he gave, he cited 13 countries where he found an understanding, a belief, the folklore of vampires. Did he believe himself? I'll tell you what I really think he believed. He believed in spiritualism. He was interested in what happens to the souls after our
Mm,
physical body's gone. Now, does he believe they come back? Maybe he hoped that. I don't know. But he certainly wrote a compelling story that gives people
yeah.
pause to wonder about what happens and if these souls do come back, these restless souls, tortured souls that come back, people, suicide victims and so on, that come back seeking a restful place or seeking the blood from the living to continue their life in some
Some
form or another.
sort of vengeance to carry on their maybe unfinished business, which I mean, I think we see in a lot of other maybe other universal monsters or other type of cryptids or anything, but it feels like Brom really took that and didn't really just carry it and run with it. He paused, took a break, really
Right.
understood it, and then wrote and sort of filled in the gaps on his own.
Well, again, I go back to these books he found in the London Library. It's incredible. He was quite a serious student. Wrote a book about the duties of clerks of petty sessions. He had a legal mind. When I've analyzed these books that meant so much to him in the London Library, one of them was called Land Beyond the Forest, Transylvanian Superstitions.
Mm,
He really focused on the fact that these people, which were a real mixing pot of cultures and religions, had a real belief that this sort of stuff went on, that if the soul was not at rest, it would come out and, as you say, seek vengeance. And so he
hmm
wanted to make that seem real. So what did he do? He had real places, Whitby, England, all these different places in London. He made the story come to the shores of this city. The center
Right.
of the arts, the center of everything was London. They had just come from the Jack the Ripper murders, which were unsolved. And now he subjects them to the reality of a supernatural creature on their doorstep, trying to enslave them all.
hmm Yeah, because once you set, and I believe every monster, every story has its own time and place. But you put orcs or something in Middle Earth, and it's like that's so compelling. You get to build that universe. But when you have a monster or something that is walking down, maybe fictionally or non-fictionally, depending if you believe, but the same street that you walk down, like that adds just another level of terror.
Yeah, and he can look like you.
Oh.
Obviously, in movies they've depicted him different ways, but that's the power of the vampires. He can shift into different things. He can be
hmm
a wolf. He can be a bat. He can be mist. He could be a handsome-looking guy. He could be this horrible-looking guy when he needs his blood like something out of the grave that's just been rotting for a couple of weeks. So he has that ability to morph and to move and to be amongst the creatures that he is trying to enslave and take their blood. That's what's so horrifying. It's
Yeah.
hard to see the enemy.
And it's, you mentioned how he could look just like you. He could look, completely terrifying. I guess it really depends on what the, for lack of a better word, what the current pop culture climate is, and maybe what people are viewing a Dracula type as. So since 1897, when that first book came out by Bram, I mean, vampires have changed quite a bit. I mean,
Yeah.
how would you? I mean, do you think? I mean, so first of all, let's say, how do you, how do you view vampires? Like, how would you say that they've changed since Bram Stoker's original idea?
That's a great question. And the thing is, when Bram described his Count Dracula, he was all dressed in black. He had this sort of gray hair, big bushy eyebrows, pointed ears. He didn't look like the attractive, suave, debonair Bela Lugosi
Right.
who showed up on stage in
hmm
1924. But that was necessary, Paul. And Bram would have approved. I'm sure he would have. He died in 1912, so he didn't see his story go on stage.
Right.
But being a stage man, he would have realized, just as Hamilton Dean, John Balderston, and others have done, you need to have an attractive leading man, otherwise people won't come to the
hmm
theater. So they have Bela Lugosi, and they make him mysterious. They give him a presence. He's more off stage than on stage. He's in the minds of the other actors. But when he does come on stage, he's got that incredibly good looks, but he also doesn't have a whole lot of lines to say. He's
Right.
got his presence. And then you morph that forward to, Christopher Lee, who comes back a little sinister, but he's still this tall, imposing, good looking guy. Again, has this power. Then
hmm
as the years go on and we come forward to, Jack Palance, Frank Langella, we go to Gary Oldman and everybody in between, they begin to take on more human-like qualities, as well as they blend in more with as you said, with the culture they're living in. You go to Vampire Diaries and True Blood and
And
everything in between.
Twilight, and just these huge,
Yeah, they look
different
just like
iterations.
everybody in your neighborhood, which to me is just as scary. Because
Yeah.
if you don't know who wants to, suck your blood around the next corner, you can't identify who the enemy is, and then it's again in our minds.
Right. They're not wearing a cardigan that says, "Hey, I'm a vampire," and that's what's terrifying about it. And I think that's what's from what I'm getting, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit more, but from Bram Stoker's original idea of what Dracula is and maybe what the perception of vampires is to even something like Vampire Diaries. The core element is that it feels like it's still just terrifying because you don't know. There's always that element of maybe they're just really suave and chic, and you it's just hard to understand.
It is, and that's one of the powers. But let's go back a little bit, because I think you said the common denominator of all these creatures is, no matter what they look like when they do
Hmm.
their morphing or their regeneration, they are dead creatures brought back to life. And everybody's, has their own rule book. Bram Stoker had his, and Stephen King, and Anne Rice, and Stephanie Meyer, and everybody else has. How did their creatures begin? What
Right.
started. Bram was like really steeped in transcending superstitions. Others have taken another cool but believable origins, which is cool. They have to then come back and take something from the living. Most of the time it's blood, sometimes it's energy, but it's they take life from the living. And to do so,
Hmm.
they need to be accepted into the society,
Right.
or they need to trick people into their castle. In some way, they've got to play mind games. And there are certain rules. It's not like Frankenstein where they can just bash the door down. There are certain rules. They might have to be invited in. Sometimes they
Mm.
can't be outdoors in the daytime, otherwise they burn up. Sometimes they can be outdoors, but they don't
Right.
have all the power. They can travel by air, or they shapeshift into mist. There's rules that all different writers play with, that in a way, I think is kind of cool, because it makes the vampire have to really think. The writers have to think, how do I apply my
Mm.
vampire to this story? He's not super all powerful that can break through anything. He's still got to maneuver, and he's still
Right.
got to get into the minds of his victims and
Hmm.
mess with them, either through hypnosis, or the handout, the mesmerism thing, or just basically trick them into something. And that's the power of it, is they do get into your minds, either a physical attraction, like
Hmm.
many of the things we mentioned, or they just exert a power over you that you can't say no.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned that because so much like any great monster or universal monster, like again, I've got a couple back here, but specifically with Dracula, like it seems that maybe the love of Frankenstein kind of comes and goes. Like we have some movies, but vampires have always been at the forefront of pop culture. So I'm curious, in your professional opinion, I mean, why have people never been disinterested in vampires? I mean, it's still so prevalent.
This is my own theory, Paul. We all die, as far as I know, unless you've got some secrets of some of your friends in Sideshow. We're all going to
Nope,
die sometime, right?
just coffee,
There we
doing the
go.
trick so far.
Yeah, sure. We're all going to die. And so at some point, at some time, religion does something, organized religion, and there's many of them, of course, are going to
Hmm.
give people some degree of comfort as to what's going to happen after our physical life ends. Where are we going to go? And I think at that point, when people think of what's the possibility of immortality, am I going to be off in a cloud somewhere? Am I rotting in the ground? Where does my soul go? What's
Right.
it going to be like? And if that possibility, as the myths and the legends of the vampire do pertain, if that presents a possibility, you wonder. And you wonder just for a little bit. You read a good story by somebody, you see a good movie, a good figure, and that's what keeps the vampire relevant in everybody's mind. And of course, as the years go on, and it's 125 years next year that
Right.
Dracula is published, and that's just Dracula. That's not the hundreds of years ago that the myth started, because Eastern Europe had these plagues. America has had tuberculosis. People believe that was vampirism. So we're talking hundreds and hundreds of years where people have been thinking about this idea of a vampiric creature of some sort.
Right.
So he's not going away for a long time, he or she or it, because it's part of our consciousness to worry
Hmm.
about the undead and immortality. And if that's an
Right.
option, bite me, suck my blood, I'll take some of yours, and I'm living forever. Now that might present its own problems, it might, but nonetheless, it's a pretty cool concept if you're worried about rotting in the ground and the worms
It's
coming
like,
in
you
and
mean
out.
I gotta pay mortgage and taxes for the rest of my life? Oh, jeez. All right. I think it's interesting, and that's one of the great questions that I'm glad will never be answered, is that, why do we love this? Why are we fascinated? I think it's like that pursuit of that question and the pursuit of that answer that is the reason why I think people love your books, and why, it's on all of these must-read lists for Dracula fans, and why you've won and been nominated for awards, I believe in like 2018 for 'em, is because it's just that constant search for that answer that hopefully we never get, because we can just keep moving.
Now you're right, and look, certainly JD and I are not the only ones. There's lots of great writers that delve into the vampire scene, and what I like to see is every year, obviously around Halloween, they're highlighted, but there's always some new writers that come into the mix to join people like Richard Matheson, who is gone, but his stories, I Am Legend, is so good, and Anne Rice and Stephen King. Grady Hendrix has come out with the book last year. There's always somebody that's reinventing this, giving another spin, and that's great. Every now and then we'll come up with a cool story. I've got another one in the works, and some short stories as well. But it's like Bram Stoker started it, but he is so
Right.
proud, as am I, that many other people are taking it in many other directions to keep it relevant, keep it new, keep it interesting.
Yeah, and so with that, I'm curious, as someone who is so deeply involved in, the brain of Bram Stoker, and also just in Dracula in general, are there any writers, are there any people out there who've added significantly to vampire lore that you're like, man, that's a great idea. I wish I would have thought of that first, or like, do you have some favorites?
Well, I tell you, Kim Newman, who wrote an Anno Dracula series, that was interesting. But what he did was he brought Dracula to London and had him infiltrate the royal family.
Oh.
and again, shows it kind of picked up on something that Bram Stoker didn't do, just because he had page constraints. Dracula was 485 pages, and he had to cut out 102 pages.
That's the
So
abridged
what was
version.
what was Dracula going to do in London? Well, Kim
Yeah.
Newman in his Anno Dracula series did that. Fred Saberhagen is another one I like, who actually wrote Dracula, but from the perspective of Count Dracula. What was happening? I've been so misunderstood. Here's my version of the story. That was interesting. So those are the ones that pop up. Chelsea Quinn Yarbrough, Hotel Transylvania, came up, again with Saint Germain, who again was another historical character who had, this concept of being an immortal being, but in France, where they have a rich history also of vampirism. So those are some of the big ones. And I mentioned Richard Matheson, I Am Legend, that has been made into about 3 different movies. It was actually voted the top vampire story of the century, which is cool. And of course, Stephen King, Salem's Lot, blew me away as a kid when I read that story when I was in college. And of course, the Anne Rice series, all the True Blood series are awesome. Those are sort of the top. Oh, David Wellington is an interesting one. Kind of a up and coming guy that wrote a few books, contemporary sort of vampire stuff as well. Got to give him a plug.
I think Paul got frozen here.
I think whatever I said to Paul had some effect on him. So he's maybe in need of some blood at the moment. Who knows?
I think Paul is in shock right now. Paul is in shock. Hold on, let me get on camera. But I was listening backstage. Hold on, let me see if my face comes through. Oh,
There we
here
go.
I am.
Hey, Alex.
Hi. So I was actually I was actually in the back talking about I was backstage sending Paul messages about like other comics that I've read that also like adapt the story into different and original things. You know what I mean? Because I mean, again, we have vampires, we have and Dracula himself. I mean, even I don't know, how do you feel about Castlevania and stuff like that, like the video
No,
game?
that I think that. I mean, listen, I'm actually working with some guys, Chris McCauley, trying to create in what we call the Stoker verse, expanding Bram from Dracula novel and into some other graphic novels as well. and also into video games. There's nothing wrong with that at all. I think it's fantastic. I'll tell you one that just popped into mind. The Bela Lugosi estate, created with Legendary Comics just last year, which I wrote the afterword for.
Yeah.
The Bela Lugosi version of Bram Stoker's Dracula in a graphic novel. So what's so cool, Alex, is you get to see, wherever you see the face of Dracula, you see Bela Lugosi. And back in 1931, he was not allowed to have fangs on.
Right.
But in the graphic novel, you see him with fangs. So now you get to see what he looks like with fangs. And the artwork is incredible. Legendary guys did a great job on that. I actually adapted, with Chris McCauley's help and Jessica Martin, one of Bram's short stories into a graphic novel. And we're trying to do some of those in other ones. We did The Virgin's Embrace, which is a really horrific story that's based on Bram Stoker and his wife's honeymoon in Nuremberg, Germany.
Okay.
And that's my first attempt with Esther Cardella, the cover artist, and Jessica Martin. And so I'm just learning the gig on how to turn this stuff into those little boxes. You have to get all of the text in the boxes and hire really good artists.
It's almost like a movie script that you have to write and then give it to an artist for them to adapt.
That's
it.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Luckily, I've got Chris McCauley helping me do that, and he's a star doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Yeah, because I know Dynamite Comics did their version of Dracula, which was brilliant. I read this interesting one too. I wonder what you think about this take, where it was they were almost like a blood virus. It was called I Am Legion, and it was like Dracula was this conscious virus that traveled in blood from victim to victim.
Oh, that's so cool. I mean, my friend Jonathan Maybury did a series called V Wars on Netflix.
Oh yeah.
And it's the same idea. Is this something in the blood, got released in Antarctica and it started traveling, and the whole blood science thing. I didn't say this at the top of the show, but one of my part-time jobs is I teach CPR and first aid.
Okay.
So it's like we get down there and start pumping and breathing, and you're about to go in for the breath, and people go, "Oh, you're the Dracula guy. Don't bite the mannequin." But it's really cool when you think about, and we writers play with this. You play with the science of it and say, obviously, there's something in the blood, the vampire blood, that infects. Is it a contagion? Is it a virus? How does it get into the person? How does the vampire transmit it? And then can they be solved? And I know there's been some movies, and I can't think of the names now, where they try to create a process to go back in, do a transfusion, and do something. I don't know if it's sticking garlic in, to sort of let these vampires transfer back to being mortals. It's a cool concept. Yeah,
it's fascinating because you think about it, like back in the day when it was originally written, there was the science wasn't there yet. The science wasn't there for any of it yet. So now, like, applying today's science. Oh, I think Paul's back. I think he's got his power back in his apartment. Let's bring him back on stage now. See, I get 5 minutes to talk to a legend here, and and now
he's had his blood transfusion, has he?
Yeah, he got his blood transfusion. Now he's back to life. All right, I'm going to give you back to Paul. It was great meeting you and talking to you. I'm out of here.
Nice, Alex.
Thanks, Alex.
He's
Sorry about that.
No, listen, we were just talking about how you needed a blood transfusion, and Alex was saying, and it's good. It's a good lead in. Back in the day, the medicine that was available to people, really wasn't that sophisticated. They didn't have blood typing. But I would love to tell the listeners, Bram Stoker's eldest brother, Thornley Stoker, was actually a cutting-edge surgeon at the Royal College of Surgeons in Dublin. JD and I put him in our story because he actually helped Bram as a medical advisor to Dracula. I've seen his handwriting in the Dracula typescript that the Paul Allen estate, the Microsoft co-founder, he owns the Dracula typescript. And when JD and I were out looking at it, we saw Thornley's handwriting explaining to Bram how you do the surgery, the brain trephination on Renfield when he had the hemorrhage, how you do the blood transfusions on, obviously, Lucy from the Band of Heroes, what kind of knives you use for dissection. So Bram was, again, detailed enough to think we need to apply some kind of science to this story, and medical science, so people believe it's real. That's so that's where we were heading when you were off getting your own blood transfusion.
Yeah, it went wonderfully. Just added a couple more grays, but other than that, I'm fine now.
Good. Yeah.
I also blame that dang Wi-Fi technology. Or maybe it was the sun. It could have been a number of things.
Yeah, with that new blood in you, that sun, you got to watch out. A lot of sunblock.
Yes,
Yeah.
lots of it. I had if you don't mind, we've got a couple of questions and comments
Sure.
from the many folks watching right now that have that were curious. So first, and I'm also really curious about this, where does the name Daker come from? Because it's such a unique name. It's seriously, we get one curse word a show here. It's a really badass name.
Well, thank you. It is not made up to sound anything like Dracula, and I get accused that about once every convention. Somebody, oh, you just made it up. But no, it's Irish. Obviously, Bram Stoker is Irish. He was one of 7 children, and there was lots of interesting names of the family. But Bram's father had a brother, and that brother called one of his children Daker. He had a very long name. It was HHG, Henry Hugh Gordon. And then at his christening, this fellow came along who was good friends of the father, said, if you name him Daker, I'll leave you my fortune. At the time, he was into diamond mining, so Mr. Stoker was smart. He named him Daker. And that little boy grew up to be a short guy, but he became a very interesting guy. He was an Irishman in the British Navy in World War I. He was assigned to the submarine corps and on loan to the Australians, who, when they bought their first 2 submarines from the British, and drove the sub, sailed the sub down to Sydney to train a crew. They were there for part of the war until Dacre Stoker marched into the war office and said, you're wasting your time. There's no Germans down here, no Japanese down here. And they sent them off to Gallipoli, which was that horrible landing where all the Allied forces met their doom, crawling up the faces of the rocks. But Dacre Stoker brought his AE-2 submarine up the Dardanelles. The first enemy ever to get up there. They torpedoed a ship. They'd never seen a submarine before. World War I, the Turks didn't. And they ended up staying underwater for so long that they almost asphyxiated, and they had to leave the sub. So they scuttled the sub, came up top, and then ended up in not a very pleasant stay in a Turkish prison for the rest of the war. But he survived, and my parents met him on their honeymoon, and they thought this was a cool guy. Hell of a story. And so they decided they're going to name their first son Daker, and that's where I got the name.
And that's you.
That's me.
What a story. Wow. I think my name was just picked out of a book, I think. I don't know. No, I'm a junior. I'm named after my dad, but that name was definitely out of a book. So we had another, a couple of other questions, which again, I'm sure it's hard to choose for you because it's like picking a favorite child. But do you have a favorite, like, that's not Dracula, or let's say that is Dracula? Do you have a favorite reimagined version of Dracula that you're like, that's fun? I really like that particular version.
Boy, there's so many, starting with 1931, Francis, when Todd Browning worked with Lugosi, but that's an era where films were just so basic, Then you move forward to 58 with Christopher Lee. I think my favorite though at the moment is Gary Oldman. I mean, he had the benefit in 1992, the Francis Ford Coppola, Bram Stoker's Dracula. He had the benefit of incredible costumes. They won 3 Academy Awards. But I got to say, the story is not totally faithful to the novel, but I'm okay with that. Jim Hart, the screenwriter, who did Hook, he did all kinds of different movies, and we have actually presented together. I talk about Bram Stoker writing Dracula. He talks about why he was the screenwriter and taking this horror story and turned it into romance. But at the time in '92, that's what the industry needed. That's what the spectators were looking for. And although it's not 100% faithful, it's kind of like 70% faithful to the novel. I think that's my favorite at the moment anyway.
Yeah.
But I will say this, because I am faithful to Christopher Lee. As Christopher Lee said it, nobody has filmed it like Bram Stoker wrote it. And so I'm still waiting for the super faithful adaptation using that epistolary style. They did that in '92 Coppola, but it's still, they didn't follow through exactly the same way. So maybe there's time for that, Paul, as well.
Hey, never too late. I mean, if you're Dracula, you've got all of eternity to really just get the screenplay right, I
There's no
think.
rush. He's not going anywhere. We are, maybe.
Oh, yeah, you just got to wait for the right audience. Jump on the train at the right time. Yeah, so I mean, we brought up if Bram had believed in vampires. Where do you stand on if you believe vampires or vampire-like creatures exist in real life?
Well, I'll tell you, I've done a lot of traveling, and I've met some interesting people in the last 12 years of this. I've been to different parts of Romania. I've been to where Bram said his castle. I've been to Bran Castle. I've met people who suck a lot of energy out of you by hanging around psychic vampires. Paul, I've been to New Orleans, which in as far as North America goes, I think between LA and New Orleans, you have covens of people that practice vampirism, more
Right?
voluntary than involuntary, thank
Yeah.
goodness. And I understand that, like there are people that believe that the voluntary taking of blood is what they need for their nutrition, their
Right.
psychic powers, whatever it is. And I'm okay. It's cool. I've met folks. I've talked to them about it. So yeah, I have met people that practice it, and I believe it. I like to believe that the other type, Bram's type, keep an arm's distance because I get a little squeamish myself. Just because I write the stuff doesn't mean I'm not scared. In a full moon in a graveyard. Maybe if that grave opens up and Uncle Bram was telling the truth, I'm the first to, run off to the boys' room.
Yeah, hightail, I get it. Like we joke, you don't have to outrun everyone, just a few of them. So, well, you brought up a good point. You are a writer and you are again an expert on the subject. But again, you can't always, unless I'm completely mistaken, you can't always be writing Dracula all the time. What do you like to do, Dacre, when you're not writing Dracula, or maybe some things that people would be like, that's unusual. I wouldn't think the writer and the aficionado on the subject would be doing that thing.
Well, I take off the shirt because it doesn't blend into the outdoors all that well. I am an avid outdoors guy. I love to fly fish. I love to hike. I love to go to exotic places, Tierra del Fuego, British Columbia, Montana, great places where I can
Montana,
get the
wow.
great outdoors, lots of
Hmm.
sunlight. Sometimes I have my own horrors out there, though. Bears and wolves like to be, in forests where guys like to
Yeah.
fly fish. So, it may not be garlic, but it's going to be bear spray.
Yes.
Yes, that's kind of what I like to do when there is a pause between seasons of vampire seasons or writing projects. Is get outdoors. I also like to play this strange game of court tennis. That's when we have
Right,
to
you're
put on
mentioning.
white clothes, which is the opposite of the black stuff that I wear. And funnily enough, I actually coach the #1 ranked player in the world, Camden Revere, who is
Hey,
actually
nice.
playing in Philadelphia right now at the U.S. Open. So that's another interesting thing that I like to do, which is an old-fashioned, interesting game that was invented in the 1500s.
Yeah, that was, who knows, maybe Brahm himself played at some
He was a
point in
big
his life.
sport. I'll say
Really?
one
Oh,
thing about
well, an
Bram Stoker,
Olympian.
which is
Yeah.
he played rugby. For Trinity College, he was a champion race walker. He was a rower. He actually won the all-around Trinity Athletic Championship.
Wow.
So he was a very physical guy. 6'2", big, strong guy. Did all kinds of interesting sport back in the day. And I think that power he needed because his life, when he was not only writing in the free time, but he was the manager of the Lyceum Theater for Sir Henry
Oh,
Irving, who played
right.
the role of Mephistopheles. I mentioned came to America 8 times. He did everything. These were the days when the manager does everything, arranging all the trips, the bookings, the interviews. He was quite a
Wow.
guy, and at the end they say it was kind of sad. The big man with the big heart, wore out. His life.
Mm,
He just put everything into it and just kind of wore out at the end.
yeah. Especially, it's one of those things where you're like, I wish Bram could see how long, Dracula, his character, his baby, has lasted in pop culture, and how, yourself, you're even carrying the torch on, and I'm sure there may be someone here who can help. There may be writers here watching that will carry on the torch after you, as
Yeah.
well. I mean, that's got to be exciting as a writer to know that the story's never done.
No, you're right, and I think in a way Bram Stoker, wherever his soul is at the moment, is resting, thinking that You know, what I created 124 years ago is cool. Remember, he was a theater manager. And when you think of long runs of plays like Les Miserables and Cats, Dracula, 124 years in as many different adaptations as it has, I think he'd be pretty satisfied, you know, especially this season when he looks back and sees what I'm doing and what others have done to keep his legacy alive. I think he'd be pretty proud.
Yes, I completely agree. Dacre, thank you so much for being with us during Spooktacular. I know you are incredibly busy, and you had mentioned if the world was back to normal and everything, you'd be on the road, you'd be in Dublin, you'd be in all sorts of places. So thank you for taking just a little bit of your incredibly busy schedule and spending it with us. We really appreciate it.
Well, I've got to thank Sideshow for keeping, you know, famous monsters alive, keeping them going. You know, and Dracula is one of them. So thank you, Paul, and Sideshow as well for keeping everything going.
Oh, we appreciate it. And hey, it's where we got our start, and it's where we're gonna, keep going. So, Dacre, is there anything else? Of course, you've got your the pre. So let's bring up one of the books up first that people can get right now. This, of course, is Dracula the Undead. This is the official sequel to the the year always gets me, 1897 official book that you wrote with Ian Holt, and then we also have the prequel. Boom, Dracul. That this one came out in 2018, right?
Yes, it did. Yep, 2018 with J.D. Barker. Yep, those are all available on Amazon. And as we mentioned, The Lost Journal has just actually come out by Hellbound Books on paperback, which is nice because it was on hardcover, which is hard to get, and now it's out of print. But the paperback has come out. So if you want to get into Bram Stoker's mind, especially this time of the year, and see what this guy was thinking as a young guy, that's another option for you.
Yeah, and go read the Lost Journal as well, as he was mentioning. I mean, so much of you were saying just living the dream of researchers and fans out there, going from one place to understand just little excerpt of the journal. I mean, it's so exciting.
Little kernels tricked me around the world. Next year I've got plans to take people to Cruden Bay, Scotland, where Bram wrote the book, Transylvania, obviously where the story was set, Whitby, England, where he set chapters 6, 7, and 8, and actually Dublin, Ireland, where all the germination happened with young Bram. So lots of travels ahead. Hopefully we just tackle this pandemic and travel becomes easier, and we all go forth and have a better life.
Yes, fun and safe travels for you, sir. I think it would be, it would be really interesting, especially if we've got to say, maybe we'll get you on Strike a Pose or some of our other shows. I believe we've literally just cracked the surface of all of the stories that Dacre Stoker has to tell us. Dacre, is there anything else coming up, any other than the books where people can get on Amazon and Barnes & Noble that you've got coming up that you want to, this is where we, this segment that I'm just naming, sink your teeth into this and plug away, sir.
Well, there's a couple of interesting new books that have just come out. One is a graphic novel that Chris McCauley and I did called Virgin's Embrace. That's our first attempt at taking Bram Stoker's short stories into graphic novels. And then Slane's Castle Secret History, again with Mike Shepard. There is a real castle in Cruden Bay, Scotland, where Bram Stoker wrote the novel. And Bram actually went in the castle when he was there, and he used the inside of that castle for his inside of his fictional castle in Romania. So that book has just come out, Slane's Castle Secret History. It'll be out by Hellbound Books very soon.
Nice.
Dracula's Bedlam is another one that Chris McCauley and John Peel, who is a Doctor Who writer, is coming out shortly with Andrews UK Global Publishing. So yeah, just Google Dacre Stoker and that stuff will come out. Go to dacrestoker.com and also visit bramstokerestate.com. Lots of factual information that we love to share with researchers, interested fans all over the world. My wife and I have kind of a repository of information about the family. Lots of cool things you'll learn about Uncle Bram and the rest of the Stokers.
Wonderful. Yeah. Dacrestoker.com. Be on the lookout. You've got the prequel, the sequel, and you've got the notes inside of Bram's brain there. Dacre, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your spooky season, sir. And thank you all so much for watching during Spooktacular. We are not done. We've got a couple of shows left today. But again, I know I've already said it a couple times, but a huge, huge thank you, Dacre, for taking the time out to hang out with us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Paul. And you have a safe, happy Halloween yourself.
Alrighty, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you guys so much. And as always, don't forget to let your geek side show.